All right, everybody. Good morning. I'm so glad you can make it today. Welcome to the Regenerative Growers Guide to Garden Amendments with Nigel Palmer. My name is Hannah McDonald, and I am the Western Massachusetts Regenerative Food Systems Coordinator with NOFA Mass, and I'm here to facilitate this presentation today. I also have Jessie Steinberg here with me, and she's going to help me do a little bit of facilitating. So if anything comes up, feel free to message either of us in the chat. So I want to introduce you all to Nigel. Nigel Palmer. He's the author of the Regenerative Growers Guide to Garden Amendments. He's a lifelong gardener, relying on the amazing complexity of nature to inspire his gardening practices. He believes we're all experiential gardeners, given a new canvas each year. And with that, he develops curriculum for and instructs the Sustainable Regenerative Garden Program at the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition. And it's on the t-shirt there. And before we jump in, I have a couple of details to go over with you. If I can get my slide. Okay, here we go. So this is our land acknowledgement slide. It's really important to us. We're presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed, stewarded, and inhabited before European colonization. We'd like to take a moment. Feel free to find your location on this map that Jessie will drop into the chat and honor those whose land you now occupy. A few ways to center racial equity in your work so that we can change our awareness to action instead of consciousness alone is to assist BIPOC-led organizations such as the Urban Farming Institute, Gardening the Community, the African Alliance, and Native American Rights Fund by sharing resources, such as land, money, tools, connection, even your own physical presence is really helpful. Support legislation that will begin the talk and advance the work towards reparations, and protect the rights of food and farm workers who work so hard to get us the food that we eat daily. And in the name of Chief Sekwan Pajaki, also known as Chief George Spring Buffalo, he says, "We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetrated in the name of this country and make a commitment to uncovering that truth." So I'm glad you are all here today to honor that with us. Nigel actually has two things to share with us regarding the Native folks of his land and some of the things that he's learned throughout his studies and life. So Nigel, if you want to go ahead and share that information with us right now, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. Sure, the first thing is that I live on the land of the Massacos here in West Granby, Connecticut. And when you look at the history of indigenous people in this part of the world, most of the stories, many of the stories are indeed tragic. But very interesting and worth learning about. In this particular area, the Massaco land was transferred to European settlers when a local native man burned the tar of a person who was mining tar for shipbuilding in the day. And this person was arrested and was fined an amazing sum of 914 meters of wampum, which in and of itself is a very fascinating method of demarking money. And when you look into what that really is, in today's standards, you'd shake your head and you'd say, oh my gosh, how can that possibly be worth anything? But it gives an idea of the way things used to be. Anyway, the people of the Massaco couldn't afford that money, and so they deeded the land to the person, and that was it. And it's known as the Massaco Division, and it includes the lands not only where I live in West Granby, but it also includes the lands of Canton and Simsbury here in Connecticut. There's a book that I've been reading that I thought that I'd like to introduce to you, and it's called Manitou. And this book is really fascinating. It talks about the sacred landscape of New England's native civilizations. And it speaks specifically about rock formations around New England. The classic conversation about rocks and walls and things like that in New England is that they were created by the settlers when they were making fields. And in fact, this book talks about many of the rock formations all over New England and starts talking about their archaeological descriptions. And the fact that they're not just stock walls, but they're underground chambers and perched boulders and structures indicating a rich awareness and culture in tune with nature. When you look at where these rocks are in relationship to astrological sightings of stars and things like that, you find that these formations line up perfectly well with specific constellations and specific stars throughout the years. So in one vein, they're calendars, and they have many other things associated with them. What's really cool is when the archaeologists that are doing the work in this book, when they dig down to the bedrock that is the foundation of these rock formations, they find that they're 700 and 1,000 years old. And also when you go back in time, if you know about astrology, the actual location of stars changes as times go on. And so by noting where these rock formations are lined up and how much they're off from existing stars, you can determine how far back they were actually used. And again, they go back thousands of years. And so the point is that many of the stone structures that are in New England can be attributed to native cultures in thousands of years old, and not the European stone movers and rock builders that a lot of academia credit it for. That's what I had on that subject.
Great. Thank you so much. Y'all can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great, because it's giving me some technical difficulties on the back end. So anyways, thanks so much for sharing that. It's really great to have that context because there's so much more to learn. And so I actually dropped that book in the chat if folks are interested in reading it. So yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nigel.
Welcome.
Great. So next up, I have some Zoom norms, some session etiquette. We make every effort to get the questions you have answered during the workshop, so we'll save those for the end. If you want to make sure that your question gets answered, go ahead and drop it in the chat or write it down and wait till we're ready to field some questions. And questions are what make the conversation really juicy and applicable, so definitely jot your questions down. When that time comes to speak, you can click the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen. But for right now, please mute yourself. If you can, if you're having trouble, let us know. We can mute you for you. So yeah, please do that for us. There is the option to save the chat in case, there are some links and whatnot that are appealing to you and conversation or whatever it might be. You'll be able to click the three dots at the bottom of the screen, and it will give you the option to save the chat, and will download to your computer, probably into your download file. You might have to extract onto your desktop. And please note that this session is being recorded. I would like to take some time to acknowledge our sponsors. They make our conference possible. I encourage you to purchase from them when you see them present in your stores. Take a look at all the folks who have helped this take place today. And then I'll give you a little time on this slide to really absorb it. And then here's our silver sponsors, and got some really great folks here. So make sure to support your vendors or your sponsors. And then that takes me to We have an online auction, which there's lots of really cool stuff going on, a 5-pound bag of coffee from Dean's Beans, and a couple of books and other really, really great stuff. I think there's some compost on there. So go ahead and check out the auction at this. You can even, I think you could just like Google NOFA Mass Auction in case you can't type go rally up NOFA Summer Conference. And then we have our virtual vendors too. So normally in our in-person conference, you know, we have a bunch of folks staking up, offering us the stuff that they have. We don't quite have the opportunity to do that, but luckily people are really savvy and have created the marketplace online. So feel free to check all of these out on our virtual vendor. You can find that on the NOFAsummerconference.org. And there are discount codes available. So this is your opportunity to get some of those good things at a cheaper rate. So thank you so much for spending the weekend with us, especially to our NOFA Mass members who make the education and advocacy work possible. I'm really glad to have you at this presentation today. So with that, I will turn it over to Nigel.
All right. So thank you very much for inviting me, NOFA Mass, and thank you for all of you who are joining us today to learn about what I think is this most important topic. So let me try and share my screen here. And you should see that presentation. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is why use homemade amendments. And what I'd like to do is figure out how to turn the page. Here we go. So what I'm going to do today is talk about why using homemade mineral amendments. And in order to do that, there are a bunch of things that need to be discussed in order to set up that conversation. The first thing I want to do is talk about a soil plant model. Models are extremely useful, although they're not actually always right, but they are very useful in couching a discussion and making a framework for those conversations. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the rhizosphere model. And within that rhizosphere model, I'll be talking about the relationship between a soil ecosystem and healthy plants. The two go hand in hand. You can't have a healthy plant without a soil ecosystem. And then I want to talk a little bit about the use of foliar sprays as a short-term amendment application. I'll mention drenches a little bit in there, but primarily we're going to talk about this short-term application of mineral and biological amendments. And those three conversations will set up a conversation about why homemade mineral and biological amendments are so important. I'll summarize that conversation, and then normally if I was in person, I'd show people how to make one of the amendments, in this case, vinegar extractions. And so I have a very short video, about a 12-minute video that I'll show after that, showing how to actually make some of these things so that you can realize how simple they really are to make. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about a database that I'm putting together. And then finally, there'll be time for question and answer. And there should be roughly a half an hour or at least 20 minutes worth of time for question and answers. So hopefully you'll get all your answers had. And of course, you can always reach out at some other time if you don't get your questions answered. Okay, so the first point is this soil model, the plant soil model, and talking about the rhizosphere. And of course, the rhizosphere is the interface between the plant roots and the soil ecosystem itself. And in order to grow healthy plants, you've got to have a healthy ecosystem because of the symbiotic relationship between the soil ecosystem and the plants. Within this ecosystem, the plants feed the soil feeds the plants. which is a really important concept that is required to be understood if you want to grow really healthy plants. So within this thriving soil ecosystem, there are certain things that have to take place. And the first is you need mineral diversity. When you start looking at the science of agronomy these days, there's about 15 to 16 to 18 minerals or elements that are needed in the soil in various proportions in order to grow healthy plants. And as science moves forward and more is understood about the relationships between the soil and the plants and the biology in the soil, the number of elements is actually increasing as you go forward. These elements are needed to make enzymes and other compounds that make the system work. The next thing that's needed in the soil is a biological diversity. Biological diversity is really starting to take hold. There's more conversations about biological diversity these days than I think I can ever remember in the past. And within this biological diversity is an entire ecosystem of animals of various sizes, starting off with bacteria, archaea, and fungi, and moving up through protozoa and all the way up to gastropods, earthworms, and you could throw voles and hawks and snakes and toads in there as well. So this biological diversity is extremely important. And so as soon as you start talking about a biological diverse environment, now you've got to recognize that that biology needs housing and it needs food in order for it to thrive. And so the housing in the soil ecosystem is really the tilth in the soil, the airiness of the soil. And this is brought about by amounts of calcium in the soil, as well as humus, specifically humus, which is very important. And within this soil structure, this tilth, that humus and the spaces, those interstitial spaces within the soil, allow for air to penetrate into the soil, and which is needed for life in the soil, as well as to hold on to water. And this is how we are able to retain water when we get deluges of water like we've had in the last couple of weeks. And also when there's no longer any water and we get drought conditions, all those tiny spaces will hold that water and be available for this ecosystem moving forward. And the next thing to think about is the photosynthesis efficiency. And a lot of people don't think about photosynthesis efficiency, but indeed it's an integral part of a healthy soil system. The more energy that the plant produces, the higher the efficiency of the plant to produce energy by photosynthesis, the more energy that's available to feed this system. And I'm not going to get into that today, but there are minerals that are you want to make sure the plant has access to in order to promote that efficiency. And then something that's not talked about very much at all still is energy flow and the idea of electromagnetic energy flow through the plant, as well as potential energy and some of the energies that many of us either don't even think about or take for granted, that we probably won't speak of a lot here, but the paramagnetic nature of the soil is something that should be considered as well. So within this ecosystem, the bottom line is that the plant's actually feeding the ecosystem sugars created during photosynthesis, and that is absorbed by the biology in the soil, which in turn provides the plant with compounds that it needs to prosper and grow. So within this system now, those compounds that the soil is providing the plant allow the plant to increase its sap sugar, to produce lipids and secondary metabolites. What goes on here is that now that the plants are actually getting energy from the soil, the plant no longer needs to create those compounds itself. And so it can use those extra energies to create other things. It's very similar to a human being that has on a good diet. Once you're eating good food and you get enough of it, we're allowed to create lipids and fats, and we store those fats in case of other times. Well, the plant is no different. And so what's going on here is the healthy plant, once it has the system underneath it and can create this extra energy, those lipids are actually stored on the leaf of a plant. When you look at a plant and it has that shiny, glossy layer on it, that's a fat layer. Those are lipids. And this will help the plant protect itself against airborne pathogens that would otherwise penetrate the leaf if that fat layer wasn't there. Also, as the plant gets healthier and healthier, the sugar content of the sap increases, and this protects the plant against insects. As the sugar content increases, the plant no longer becomes a food source for insects because they don't have the enzymes in their gut to digest the sugars. So once you get a sugar content in the plant that's above 12 Brix, I'm going to guess that you know what that is. And if you don't, we can talk about it. But once you get a high sugar content in the plant, insects no longer will bother the plant because it's no longer a food source. And then finally, as the plant gets even healthier still, it's able to produce secondary metabolites. These are metabolites that it doesn't need to survive, but it uses for defense mechanisms and other things. These are the antioxidants and the phytonutrients, the terpenes and the phenolics that plants use. So when we're eating a blueberry for the antioxidants in that blueberry, if that blueberry doesn't come from a healthy plant that has all of this stuff going for it, you're not eating those antioxidants. So the point here is, this symbiotic relationship between the soil and the plant enables the plant to have extra energy to produce the lipids that prevent pathogens on the airborne pathogens. It increases the sugar sap content, which prevents insects from bothering it, and creates secondary metabolites, which are the components of health that we need and want. So the next concept I want to talk about is this idea of foliar spraying. Foliar spraying is really, really beneficial because when you foliar spray a liquid onto the surface of a leaf, that plant has the ability to absorb those nutrients that you're providing it very, very quickly in minutes or even hours. Rather than if you put something on the soil, if you put a rock dust on the soil, it might take years, a year or more for it to break down into the soil, get into the soil solution, get into the root system of the plant. So foliar sprays offer a very quick method of providing nutrients to the plant. Now, most of us don't grow plants in optimal growing situations, and there's usually something lacking in the soil, even if it's just a cloudy day and you're not getting any sunlight for a long period of time, or too much rain or not enough rain. And so these foliar sprays offer an opportunity to feed the plant throughout the growing season in a very efficient manner. The other thing that is important about foliar spraying is the idea of being able to influence a plant at critical points during its growth cycle. For instance, plants that are flowering want a higher amount of phosphorus than they do during other phases of plant development. Just like humans, again, as we grow from infancy up, our nutrient requirements change a little bit as we go forward. Same for a plant. So as I was suggesting, during flowering, you want phosphorus, and during fruiting, you want to get calcium to that plant. And so if you have an amendment that you have that has a high concentration of phosphorus and calcium, you now, through foliar spraying, have the opportunity to feed that plant those specific minerals that it needs during those critical points of influence. The other thing is in the biological products that we're going to talk about, you can stimulate the soil and bring that soil to life, and also address pathogens and other biological issues that are occurring in like fruit trees and bushes and plants themselves, vegetables, by foliar spraying the biological amendments that we're going to be talking about. So the concept of the context of this discussion is really about how do you nurture a plant throughout the growing season using the tools available, and foliar spraying specifically as a quick way of getting nutrients to the plant. So now I'm going to talk about why use homemade amendments. Well, one of the most amazing things for me when I started learning about feeding plants was first the recognition that plants needed a huge array of elements in order to become healthy. And when I started looking at this array of elements, and you can see on this table, there's a list of elements at the top of it. All those elements are needed by plants, and they're needed in various proportions. And sometimes those plants need things like cobalt, for instance, in single parts per million. Per acre. And I thought to myself, well, geez, zooks, where am I going to find cobalt? Where am I going to find selenium and molybdenum and boron? Where am I going to find these things, and how I'm going to put them into a formulation of the right proportions in single parts per million and apply it over 100 square feet or 1,000 square feet or 2 or 3 acres? How am I going to do that? And it was extremely daunting for me to try and understand how I might do that. And then I learned about fermenting plants and making vinegar extractions. And the world opened up to me. The first thing I did was I went and made these fermented plants. And then the next thing I did was I decided to analyze them. And so I worked with many different labs and finally keyed on Logan Labs, and worked out a way to come up with a unified method of analyzing the amendments that I was making. And when I analyzed stinging nettle fermented plant juice, I was absolutely blown away by the fact that everything that I need was there. If you look at this table, you can see nettle fermented plant juice. And if you go along the line there, you can see that all of the minerals that are needed are there. They're all there. And this was just absolutely, totally amazing to me and empowering. And then when you thought about it, I thought to myself, well, gee, that makes sense. It's a plant. Why wouldn't everything be there? Well, stinging nettle happens to be one of the better and most powerful plants out there for making fermented plant juice. The stinging nettle is the multivitamin of the plant world, as is dandelion. Anyway, the point is that I no longer had to think about how am I going to source all of these elements. I didn't have to worry about where am I going to get cobalt. I didn't have to worry about where am I going to get selenium. It's all there. And then I didn't have to worry about mixing it. And then I didn't have to worry about, well, these chemicals, when you actually purchase them, they're in forms that may not necessarily be nice. In fact, they're very toxic, some of these things. And so now I don't even have to worry about handling these things as well. So I've eliminated the sourcing and I've eliminated the mixing needs for the minerals that I want. And now I have a product, it's water soluble. It's in a form that plants can use, and it's in the proportions that plants want. This was just absolutely amazing for me. I still get the willies when I think about it. The next thing is the idea of vinegar extractions. And when you use vinegar extractions, you're pulling concentrations from the bones or the shells or whatever it might be. And when I did the analysis on some of the vinegar extractions I was making, here you see cow bone vinegar extraction. And if you look at the P, that's phosphorus, all of a sudden I have a source of phosphorus, a huge source of phosphorus, using something that is readily available to me for free or no money at all. And so now I have a product that I can mix with my broad spectrum mineral amendments to affect those points of influence that we were talking about. The high amount of phosphorus in cow bone vinegar extractions allows me to nurture the flowering of plants when it comes to flowering, because I can provide that plant now a higher amount of phosphorus than I would otherwise with, say, a fermented plant juice of stinging nettle. Also with the eggshells and the oyster shells, those have very high amounts of calcium in it. So now I can provide a plant with extra calcium during the fruiting phase of the plant, whether it's through drenching or foliar spraying. And so now I have a way to feed my plant throughout the growing season with a complex, broad spectrum amount of minerals that the plant needs in forms that the plant can use directly. All right. So when it comes to biological amendments, this is a great way to stimulate the soil or address pathogens. Again, when I first started learning about biological amendments and the biology in the soil, the first thing I learned was that we only know 10% of the names of the bacteria and the fungi that are out there. And then archaea is a life form that was only discovered as a life form at the end of the last century, 30 years ago. And so, or 25 years ago. And so what became very clear to me is we don't know an awful lot about the biology in the soil. And again, I'm back to, well, how am I going to find a biological source that's diverse that I can actually provide to my soil or my plants? And started reading and finally learned about leaf mold biology. In this picture, this hand has a handful of leaf mold pulled up from the soil, which represents the most ubiquitous source of biology available in our particular area. And wherever you live, that is the biology of choice. And there's hundreds of thousands of biology in there, and we can nurture that. This picture is a picture of leaf mold biology, and this is nothing more than a handful of that and a boiled potato in a bucket. And once this starts frothing like this, I have an amazing source of local biology that I can use to feed my soil, to invigorate my soil, and also to use to address pathogens if that happens to be what I want to do. On the right here, this is lactic acid bacteria. This is actually refrigerator stable. And so now I have a source of bacteria that I can have in my refrigerator and use on throughout the growing season. And then of course, there's IMO4. This is absolutely an amazing product. And this is a jumping off point for gardeners anywhere, and for working with livestock as well. It's both a biological and a mineral amendment. So this whole idea of biology is beginning to catch on. People are starting to realize how important biology in the soil is. And rather than buying a package of an inoculant that has 5 strains of this and 2 strains of that come from who knows where, dehydrated, this is available in your backyard for free. And if you live in a city, even if you live in the dense city, there's a place somewhere where there's a tree, or there's a compost pile, or you could just go out of town a little bit and find some of these biological sources that you can bring into a city environment to also have available. And of course, the lactic acid bacteria you can make in your kitchen. So why use these homemade amendments? Well, these things are really easy to make. I call it kitchen chemistry. The tools needed to make these things are jars and buckets and sieves and scales, and it's just so simple to make. And what you do is you add all the ingredients in a jar, and then you go away and you leave it alone. I can do this. I can do this, ladies and gentlemen. And then when you come back, you strain it, and you've got a mineral amendment. Many of these things are just so simple to make. You can't even believe it. This picture on the top right, there's a bunch of dandelions that I picked from my garden. I actually allow dandelions to grow in my garden for many different reasons. Not only are they good to eat, not only do they nurture the soil, but you can use them as a mineral amendment. I'm going to take these dandelions, put them in this bucket, gather some rainwater from my rain barrel, and add a handful of leaf mold and let it sit for 6 months, and I have a leaf mold biology that I can use to feed my plants. Here is the vinegar extraction. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then here is a fermented plant juice, literally just adding a plant with brown sugar and letting it sit for a week and decanting it. And so these ingredients that we're using are very, very simple. The tools are very simple. They're available to you. The only thing that you might buy in this particular instance might be brown sugar or vinegar. And guess what? You can make your own vinegar so easily. Here in New England, we have apples all over the place. It's just a matter of cutting up apples, throwing them in a crock with some rainwater, and leave them alone. Come back in a couple of months and you've got vinegar. I argue that the time it takes most people to figure out what they want, get in a car, drive down to a store and buy something, bring it back, they can make these things. So they're very easy to make, they don't take a lot of time, and they're low cost. They're also sustainable. This is a really important point for me, is that these ideas and these mineral amendments are indeed sustainable. And I don't mean just buzzword sustainable, I mean really sustainable. You're using the weeds that are in your backyard or around your community. The bones and shells that you might use end up in a landfill anyway. Eggshells, at best, people throw them on their compost pile. But when you throw them on the compost pile, it has to break down in the compost pile, and it eventually gets into the soil. But you can make these high concentration mineral amendments with those eggshells. The bones, in our house, we buy knuckles in the winter time, and we make wonderful stews with those knuckles. And then those bones are used to make bone broth. So we might make 2 batches of bone broth from those bones. And then finally I get them, and there they are. And I'll cook them up to get the biology and the water out of them. And then I make vinegar extractions from the bones. And you can make 3, 4, 5 different batches of vinegar extractions from the same bones. Certainly people who go to restaurants, I happen to really like oysters. And when I go to a restaurant and order oysters, I take my oysters home. I ask to bring my oysters home in a doggy bag, and I use them to make vinegar extractions of oyster shells. I've also gone to the local restaurant with a 5-gallon bucket and talked to the chef and say, geez, how about if I leave my bucket here on a Friday and I'll pick it up on Sunday morning? And lo and behold, I have a bucket full of oyster shells. There's a lot of other stuff in that bucket, but it's easily cleaned. And then I have a bucket full of oyster shells that I can cook and make extractions from. There's meat markets around, there's fish markets around, and all of these places throw their stuff away and it ends up in a landfill. And we can utilize many of the products, of the garbage that goes from these places for making amendments. By doing this, and by using our own eggshells or our own weeds, if you will, we're eliminating transportation costs and packaging costs and any of the unethical treatment of animals or humans that goes along with the mining of minerals that takes place in the world. Many of the minerals that we get in the store without any labels are from manufacturing processes and may have other things in them that you may or may not want in your garden. So this whole idea allows for truly sustainable resources and closing the waste gaps in your community. And it brings up the whole idea of what's in your backyard. All of a sudden, you're going to look around your backyard and with a different point of view, what's available to me? And what can I use? And you're going to be amazed what you have, especially here in New England. For us in New England, we live in one of the most richest areas in the world when we think about these sorts of resources. And even if you live in places that are urban, you're going to find that there's stuff growing. That dandelion grows out of the crack of a sidewalk. There's stuff around. You just have to start looking for it and recognizing what you can do with it. The next thing is that the amendments that we're using are shelf stable. They have high dilution rates and they're non-toxic. Quite a bonus, wouldn't you say? The shelf stable part was really fascinating to me. Here's a stack of different mineral and amendments that I've made, and they can just sit on a shelf and they'll last for years. The vinegar extractions will last for years. The fermented plant juices will last for years as well. And a little bit goes a long way. A lot of people might say, well, geez, it's a lot of work and I'm only going to get a little bit. Well, if you get 1 quart of a fermented plant juice, for instance, and you're going to dilute it 500 to 1, that's 125 gallons. That's a lot of foliar spray for a home gardener. And if you're a farmer and you use a 50-gallon container to make these things, you're going to end up with an awful lot of amendment very quickly. So these things scale very easily, and a little bit can go an awful long way. I use 500 dilution rates. There's some things that I dilute 1,000 to 1 as well. So a little bit goes a very long way. The other thing is that these things aren't toxic. This can nurture the entire ecosystem, and they're not going to harm the person that's making them or applying them. When I started applying these things to my garden, there was a moment when I realized, well, wait a minute, what about the rest of my yard? What about all the trees and the grasses and the shrubs in my yard? Why wouldn't I be providing them the same nurturing? Because it's all just a big ecosystem, and I really want everything to grow and be prosperous. And so I started foliating everything. Never mind just my garden. Everybody gets it now. And as you do this, you're going to watch the pollinators change. You're going to watch some of the snakes, the toads, the frogs change. The birds might change. The insects. All of these things are going to change as you start nurturing and bringing that whole ecosystem. Remember, we talked about going from lipids to sugars and then secondary metabolites. the whole ecosystem changes and brings it up, and everything around will change. And you're going to feel so empowered. I know that when I started realizing this stuff and I was able to make these things and I no longer had to go to the store, I was feeling so good about being self-reliant, using these strategies and no longer having to rely on things that maybe I didn't really even want on my garden. But the fact that when things don't go specifically to the plant and they run off, I know they're nurturing everything. They're not harming everything. So this is working with nature. I'm not trying to kill anything. I'm trying to improve and nurture in order to get health, rather than kill the bug or kill the fungus or whatever it might be. So to summarize all of this, when you use these homemade mineral amendments, you know what's in these products. You don't have to guess. You know where they came from. They're made from plants. They come from plants. They come from bones. They come from eggshells, oyster shells. You know what's in them. And they're real easy to make. We're talking kitchen chemistry here. And you didn't have to buy it. And in many cases, you're closing the waste gap. This is truly sustainable agriculture here. We're not buying, we're not supporting oil. We're not doing anything but using what's at our fingertips for really cheap. They're shelf stable, they're not toxic, and most importantly, they're in proportions and forms that plants can use directly in the guise of foliar sprays. I don't have to mix chemicals. I don't have to worry about any of the toxicity of the chemicals that I'm buying. I can compensate for the deficiencies in my garden throughout the growing season. I can stimulate the biology. I can address pathogens, and I don't need to buy anything to kill things. As soon as you buy something to kill something, you think you're killing that bug, but you're really doing detriment to significant parts of the ecosystem. You're not just killing that bug. And it allows me to be self-reliant and empowering, which is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right. So now I'd like to show you a video of how to make a vinegar amendment. And this is about a 12-minute video. And I hope you enjoy it. Does that look like it's right?
You are good.
All right, here we go. Hello, my name is Nigel Palmer, and I'm the author of the book, The Regenerative Growers Guide to Garden Amendments. In this short video, we'll explore making vinegar extractions using apple cider vinegar, organic apple cider vinegar. Vinegar extractions are really important because not only do you get a broad spectrum mineral amendment with just about any mineral you need or want in proportions that plants will like, but you also get high concentrations of minerals like calcium and phosphorus that can be used selectively throughout the growing season to help plants with specific growing cycles. These mineral amendments are shelf stable, so they'll sit on the shelf for years, and you're diluting them at concentrations of 1 to 500 to 1 to 1,000. So 1 quart of this mineral amendment really turns out to be about 125 gallons of very, very useful garden or farm mineral amendments. Vinegar extractions. In order to make vinegar extracted eggshells, I save my eggshells in jars to cook them all at once rather than cook them individually. This jar is a jar of toasted eggshells ready to make extractions. Roasting eggshells with a toaster oven is really simple. Spread the eggs out. And we'll put it in there and hit toast. I have this set on light toast, and there's a 1 time through the light toast setting. We'll give this another go.
Here they are after a second go. And you can think things have turned colors. I'm going to give this one more time. Give it a third toast on light. Again, experimenting with settings and number of iterations. Third iteration. And after 3 goes, well, those are looking pretty good. Got that discoloration going. The organic matter is crunchy. And we'll give it a 4th iteration just to show what that does. Normally I would call this done, but we can go a 4th time. So this is a 4th iteration light toast. And we'll take a look at this. Those are good. Those are done. So in this case, I'd say those are a little overdone, but that's not going to hurt us. So 3 light toasts was an optimal way to go. These can be now stored in a jar. I'll just throw them in here. And these are ready to be used to make apple cider vinegar extractions. Alright. Eggshells can also be cooked in a skillet simply by putting the eggshells in the skillet and roasting them with that sort of action until they also become discolored. Bones and oyster shells I often cook on a grill. I usually cook at about 350 degrees for 40 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe even 50 minutes depending. Oyster shells a little bit less than bones. These bones have been on the grill at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. And I flip them to try and be consistent. But these are ready to be used for making a vinegar extraction of bones. These happen to be cow bones. This 3-liter can be used to cook bones and shells as well by putting holes in the can and opening up the top. Bones can be put in there, or oyster shells, and then they could be left on an open flame in the fire pit overnight and retrieved in the morning. I have a variety of cooked items on my shelf. As they become available, I'll cook them and put them in jars. In this case, there's some bones from cows, pigs, eggshells, and oyster shells, all ready for vinegar extraction. The vinegar extraction process takes about a week or 2 weeks at the most, and this allows me to have materials on hand in case I run out throughout the growing season. To actually make the vinegar extraction, put the eggshells into a jar, crushing them up just a little bit to increase surface area. Don't crush them too much. You want to fill the jar about 10% of the volume with the eggshells. Something like that. And then add organic apple cider vinegar. You want to leave some space at the top for the reaction to have space to occur on. This is going to bubble up and you don't want it to go over the top. And then, of course, most importantly is to label the jar so that when you come back and look at it sometime later, you'll understand what was in it. Now let's watch this reaction. You can already start to see the bubbles forming in there. How fun is that? Vinegar extracted eggshells. And we'll store that on a plate with a light cover so the gases can escape, and if anything does froth over the top, it'll land on the plate and not make a mess. We'll store this in the corner of the kitchen or any other stable place out of sunlight. After about a week or two, the reaction will stop and it can be decanted, and then more vinegar added for a second extraction. You can see that the eggshell has responded very quickly to the apple cider vinegar and popped the top and left quite the foam on the top. That's why you keep it on a plate. Decanting is very simple. In this case, I had 2 eggshell vinegar extractions on my shelf that had been sitting around for some time. This has an initial September 14th, 2020, and then a second extraction October 10th, 2020. This was started in October 2013, second one was August 2019, and then the third was July of 2020. So I'm going to put all of these into one container because it's kind of a mix-mash, and I've labeled it Eggshell Vinegar Extraction, Multiple Sources, December 31st, 2020. And you can see this is very easy to do. Use a funnel of sorts and a sieve, and I'm simply going to pour the liquid through. And the residual material I could put under a perennial plant or on the compost pile. Looks like this is pretty full. I'll just add a little bit more to top it off. And I have a quart of shelf-stable vinegar extracted eggshell for use in the garden. Decanting is done with a funnel and a sieve. Funnel just to hold the sieve, support the sieve, and make it easier to pour. Vinegar extractions are an extremely useful garden farming tool. It allows closing of the waste gaps using oyster shells from a restaurant that would have been thrown away, the bones after making bone broth that would have been thrown out or thrown on the compost pile, eggshells that might have been thrown away. And this 1 quart of vinegar extraction is not only shelf stable, but also, as I mentioned earlier, is diluted at ratios 1 to 500 or 1 to 1,000, making over 125 gallons of mineral amendment. Examples of the composition of the vinegar extractions can be found in the appendix of my book, and that actually shows the broad distribution of minerals that are in these products, minerals like selenium and cobalt and manganese and molybdenum that might be difficult to source. Quickly it's realized that all of these minerals are had by these sorts of processes, and it makes them very important processes and makes the availability of these otherwise not often thought of elements quite approachable for the backyard gardener or farmer.
Okay. And I have one more slide in my slide deck, and I'll share that, and then we'll get to some Q&A.
Here we go.
A lovely interlude.
I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles.
My guess is that's me.
Gone are the dark clouds that hide.
How fun is that?
So fun.
By the way, I planned that. Okay, can you see my screen now?
No, you actually stopped sharing screen.
Okay, thank you. Let's try that again. Share that one. Okay, here we go. Can you see that then?
We're good.
Very good. So I just wanted to point out how important the analysis of these mineral amendments is. I've included many amendment evaluations in Appendix E of the book, but I'm also starting a database that's available to anybody online for free. And if you go to my website, nigel-palmer.com, you can find the starting of this database where I'm actually trying to put as much information up there as possible. I feel it's really empowering and important for people to see what's actually in the mineral amendments that are available to them to make for free or no money or low money. This became really clear to me as I spoke to people from around the world, especially people in third world countries that may not have the resources that we have here and have plants that are different than the plants that we have here. And recognizing that if they made mineral amendments themselves of fermented plant juice, for instance, they could have it analyzed very easily and then have an idea of what's in there. So I'm trying to put together this database. I've been working with Logan Labs to standardize the analysis approach. And if you're interested in having your own amendment analyzed, you can work with Logan Lab and you can use the links on my website to do that. And you don't have to share it at all. Or if you do care to, you can actually do the analysis with Logan Labs and share that data with me as well. If you work through me and my website here, it's the same cost as working directly with Logan Labs. The difference is you'll get the analysis as well as I will, and then I'm going to post it on my website so that it'll be available for the world to see for free. Okay, so that's what I had, and I thank you all for listening, and I think I have time for some Q&A.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, Nigel, thanks so much. That is fascinating. We have tons of questions popping up through the chat, so I'll do my best to kind of organize them in a flowy way. So
okay.
Let's see. So we have a couple of questions about cooking, and I'll kind of just give some of the summary stuff in here. So address what you can.
Sure.
Some folks are wondering if the eggs might smell when you're cooking them, the eggshells, and also why a toaster oven, for example, versus other types of heat sources. And along with that, someone's wondering, why eggshells? Is it a calcium amendment? I guess, yeah, let's see. What did it say? Once you have the eggshell amendment, what do you do with it and why does it add calcium? So yeah,
okay.
some eggshells.
So let me try and chew some of that. Okay, why cooking? So the first thing about cooking is that what you're doing is you're removing the biology in the water from the whatever it is, whether it's a cow bone or an eggshell or an oyster shell. And what this does is, first of all, it eliminates those things from the process, specifically the organic material that would otherwise fester and grow. But it also opens up the pores in the medium for the organic apple cider vinegar to get into those spaces and react. So cooking is a very important aspect of it. The reason I use a toaster oven is because eggshells and like crab shells and shrimp shells and things like that, they don't require a great deal of cooking in order to do so. And so I use a toaster oven just because it's easy. Does it smell? I must admit, there are some in my house that are not exactly pleased when I cook my eggshells in the house. So I guess the easy answer is yes, they do. And the bones smell specifically bad as well. So cooking them outside is definitely something to do if you're sensitive to those sorts of things. Let's see, why use a toaster oven instead of other sources? I suggest you use whatever you have. You can use an open fire. If you happen to be having a fire, a cookout, you can take that can and throw things into the can and just toss it at on the fire at the end of the night in the coals, and that will cook these things off and they'll be ready in the morning. You could use an oven, but then you're going to suffer from the odoriferousness of it all. When you're talking about bones and oyster shells and some of these more dense bones, they do take quite a bit more time and quite a bit more heat. And so that's why I use a gas grill outside. It's easy. I do have a can that I could use, and I do have fires outside, and dropping them on a fire at the end of the night is a totally acceptable methodology as well. Did I miss any of them?
Yeah, one was the calcium components. Is that why we do eggshells, or what else is the intricacies of the eggshell?
Right. So this is why the analysis is so important. The thing about bones and eggshells is they also provide a broad spectrum mineral amendment product that can be used, and you can use them individually on plants as well. So it's really a question of using what you have, which is also another gardening tenet. There's always enough, and you use what you have. And so if that's what you have and you feed your plants with it, your plants are going to like it. It might be a lighter dilution rate, maybe 1,000 to 1 instead of 500 to 1. But this is where the experimental part comes in, where you go ahead and try these things and see what it does. I like to have, I have shelves of things, whether it's cow bones, oyster shells, egg shells, many different kind of plants, fruits. And one of the things you learn as you go forward is one of the best things to feed a plant is the fruit from that plant itself. So for instance, I gather the peaches that are no good on my peach tree, and I make a fermented plant juice of peaches, which I feed my peach trees in following years. So it's you use what you have. And again, this is why the analysis is so important, is so people can begin to understand and see what's in them and think and experiment for themselves.
Yeah. As far as, are there other indicators, such as like looking at the plants or the soil to kind of tell what sort of amendment it might need for intro gardeners? Some people are wondering about like dilution rates and, why we go for certain, that I'm guessing that might be in your book.
Yeah, all this stuff's in the book. There's a ton of junk in there. Anyway, so let's see. So points of influence, I touched on points of influence, and I think that's probably not a beginner suggestion, but in fact, it's simple enough to be a beginner suggestion. When things are flowering, they want extra phosphorus. So an amendment like vinegar extracted bones with high phosphorus contents would be something to feed that plant. Stinging nettle and dandelions are very broad spectrum amendments and could be used in general, a general purpose. Let's see, for the beginner, I would suggest for the beginner, do something, make a move. And beginner is kind of a weird term because I was gardening for 30 years and felt like I was a beginner when I started doing these things. So beginner's relative. I think the most important thing with any gardening practice is to start doing things. A lot of people look for, well, what do I do now? How do I make it perfect now? And the answer is, it's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to start to do these things. You're going to start to become aware of some of the conversations that we've just had. And you'll learn year after year. Gardening is a life process. We people that grow food and garden, we start at some point in our life and we will do it forever. And so every year you're going to learn more, you're going to try new things, you're going to find things that work for you, and it's just going to be lovely. It's going to be a lovely experience of coming in contact with nature and getting your feet in the soil and your hands in the soil and being aware of what's really going on around us in nature.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions about maybe potential downsides, such as harming any pathogens or excuse me, like any mycorrhizal fungi or concerns about propagation of anaerobic or pathogenic microbes.
Yeah, so that's a really fun conversation. And I look at pathogens and those sorts of conversations, something like this. There's no such thing as bad organisms. They're all around us. They're all around us. They're just in different forms. And when thing becomes a pathogen, it's merely out of balance. So these things that are pathogens and you're trying to kill, quote unquote, in fact, they are entirely useful and required for a plant. They're probably on the plant leaf. They're probably in the plant root system. They're always there. They're omnipresent. They're just in balance. It's just like a big society. Societies thrive when they're diverse, when they're not out of balance. And so the same thing is true of funguses and pathogens. I'm not afraid of a specific kind. Again, we only know 10% of the names of these things. These things that people are going to say are bad pathogens, for instance, they represent such a small portion of the population of funguses and bacteria and archaea that we even understand. And so in my book, there's no such thing as a bad fungus or a bad biology. It's merely an out of balance one. And when we start applying leaf mold biology to things, we're applying an incredible variety of fungus and bacteria and archaea. And so those things that are out of balance have to compete. So when you have a pathogen of fungi that's pathogenic, right, it's out of balance. Well, when you apply the smorgasbord, a tremendous variety of bacteria and fungus to that environment, that pathogen that's out of balance now has to compete for the resources that are available with all of the other ones. And guess what? It's not going to win. It's going to have to fall into balance with everybody else. And so I look at this in a totally different way. I'm not interested in killing something that's out of balance. I'm interested in providing the diversity that requires it to come into balance with everything else.
Yeah, that's awesome. And strengthening the plant on top of it to be able to resist. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So once I do that, when I apply a leaf mold biology, in fact, I just did that today to a plant. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply fermented plant juice of that plant to nurture it. So once I've provided the ubiquitous biology in order to make the pathogen compete, now I'm going to provide the nutrition that plant needs to increase the sugar content, to increase its health.
Great. That's awesome. While we're on that, we have a question about the bricks measuring process. Someone wants to know where to learn more as far as let's see, the question is verbatim: where can we learn more about the concept that high bricks count will result in lower predation? Sounds like a radical concept that directly challenges the pesticide paradigm.
Yeah, so bricks is a measure of the sugar content of a plant. My YouTube channel has a free video, just like the one you just saw, on using a refractive index, so you can check that out. The sugar content of plants is not often discussed in conventional agriculture. God knows why, but it's not. But it's pretty well understood that the high sugar content of a plant is a measure of its health. And as the sugar content of a plant increases, insects will no longer be able to eat it because they simply don't have the capability of eating it. It's not a question of, geez, I don't think I want to eat this today. It's they don't have the enzymes in their gut to digest the sugars in a high plant sugar content sap. And so these are very, very easily understood and supported conversations. So it's just a matter of finding where they are. The other thing is that when you start doing these things, For instance, my potato plants, I don't have any potato beetle problem on my plants. And the reason is that the leaves bricks very high. And anytime I see insect pressure on my plant, I get a foliar spray out like stinging nettle and I feed the plant. And immediately the plant can respond to that and you can watch the insects disappear because they can no longer digest the sap in the plant.
Great. And we actually had a follow-up to the previous question about pathogens, meaning perhaps, being pathogens can make you sick. So, there might not be any necessarily bad pathogen, but perhaps an imbalance. Is it sort of before, the application, or as far as balancing it out, or what do you think about pathogens being a potential harm to the consumer?
Yeah, so the leaf mold biology is not something that I would consume, that's for sure, because there's so much in there that I don't understand. As far as applying it to agricultural products, I wouldn't apply the biology to the agricultural products and then harvest it and eat it. But these things are going to they're there anyway. I think that that's the most important point. When I go out in my garden and pick berries, I don't bring them in and wash them. I eat them. When I go and pick a carrot out of the garden, I don't wash it. I eat it. I'm eating these things. And in fact, a lot of the biological diversity that's on fruits and vegetables that you eat directly out of the garden is going to do nothing but support your microbiome. One of the biggest problems, a problem for me, is that many of the fruits and vegetables that you buy in a store has been either irradiated or bleached or somehow changed. So you're not getting that biology. This is one of the problems with health in our country as a whole. We're not eating raw vegetables out of the garden. And heaven knows what else is on those things that go through the agricultural processes. So I would not subscribe to eating these things directly, but I'm not uptight about applying them to my crops. In fact, I do apply them to my crops, and then I don't eat them readily. In fact, a lot of times if I'm applying a biology to my crop directly, it's because the crop itself is in such poor shape you wouldn't want to eat it anyway, because it's so out of balance. So I'm not sure if that answers that question, but.
Marty, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And yeah, that definitely gets to it. I just know that in my experience with vermicompost, I have it in my head that you got to be careful letting it go anaerobic, because then you can have the propagation of potential pathogens that you're going to want to be very sure to, when you're applying it, that you're certainly not getting any in your mouth. You're going to wash your hands and such. And then, I guess I get the impression from Dr. Elaine Ingham, and she was a keynote a few years ago, and I remember her talking about the importance of the ratio of aerobic to anaerobic microbes in the different compost teas, and how you want to favor the aerobic microbes when you're inoculating the biome for your your rhizosphere or as a foliar applicant. But it sounds like the approach here is more about just diversity across the board and letting things balance out themselves.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to using electricity to make products for the garden. The garden is this whole idea of anaerobic and aerobic biology is I guess it's not something I want to get into right now, but in the soil is the biology in the soil is what's in the soil. And a lot of it is flocculative. In fact, many of the biologies in the soil are both anaerobic and aerobic. And so this whole idea of choosing one and making sure you have one or a variety of the other is not something that I subscribe to. I think that dealing with nature and letting nature figure out these things is an interesting approach.
While we're on the topic of, I guess, bacteria and whatnot, someone is asking if archaea plus potato plus water equals or is similar or same as compost tea.
Yeah, so compost tea is a word that's get battered around a lot, and there's a lot of making of compost teas, and this goes back to the whole idea of using aerators and things to make a specifically aerated product. And I guess I'm not interested in using electricity if I don't have to. I'm interested in being as simple as possible. And there's no aeration in the soil. Nobody's pumping up the soil with air. And so when you put these things on the soil, it's going to the only things that are going to survive in the soil are the things that are going to survive in the soil. So I don't see the use of those sorts of technologies in the garden. Having said that, there's an awful lot to be said for taking rainwater and mixing things in rainwater and letting it ferment. Leaf mold biology does that. Using leaf mold biology in conjunction with plants does that. Taking compost and putting it in a bucket of water and letting it soak does that. Taking IMO4 and putting it in a bucket of water and letting it soak does that. And these are ways of using these products as well. One of the reasons that I do analysis on the amendments that I make is because I want to know what's in them and I want to know what the concentrations of what's in them. And when you start looking at analyzing what you're using, I think you're going to find surprising results. I've actually done analysis, and there's some analysis in the appendix of my book where I show what literally just taking a weed and putting it in a bucket and fermenting it does. That's how I started. I figured, look, what did indigenous people do? Well, I got some stinging nettle, I threw it in the bucket, and I just left it in water, and I monitored the pH. And after a couple weeks, it got pretty darn stinky. But guess what? It works. This is what plants want. But then I started analyzing it. And what I found is the processes that people use may not provide the concentrations of minerals that they may want. And so when you just let things sit in a bucket of water, you're going to get a broad spectrum mineral, and you can look at the analysis that I've done and you can see those minerals, but you're not going to get the concentrations of those minerals that you're going to get by fermenting a plant juice or by using a vinegar extraction. And when you start adding those to IMO4 and IMO3, now you start getting really high concentrations of stuff that may be more effective. So I suggest to people that while all of these things are very interesting, I suggest the analysis of what you're actually using might be beneficial so you get a better idea of what you're actually putting on your garden or farm.
Yeah. On the analysis topic, and then I'll pass it over to Marty after these questions are looked at. People are wondering about as far as analysis goes, we have the shelf life, and you mentioned that it can last for years and years, but are there trials that test the efficacy either year by year to actually analyze whether or not it stays true to its mineral or beneficial components? And then with that, as far as the efficacy of the amendment, if you will, are there trials or examples of them being beneficial either in certain regions or certain crops who like, specific soil? Are there resources and science that people can access?
Yeah, okay. So another handful of questions. I see if I can remember them all.
I can lead you. I just figured I'd group them together while I had them.
Yeah, no, you're doing a great job. Okay, so efficacy over time, so shelf life. So yeah, so I've actually done analysis on these products over the years, and the concentrations maintain. So I'm confident that these things that do indeed have a shelf life that's good. In general, a lot of these products that sit on the shelf, the duration sitting on the shelf for some of them actually improves the concentrations of them, depending on if there's life forms in them or not. So the easy answer is depends. But things like vinegar extractions, for instance, they're very stable. They're really not going to change. Fermented plant juices might change a little bit because there's still some biology. There's actually a lot more in these things other than just the elements that we're doing analysis on. There's complex compounds, enzymes, and many other things as well. As far as effectiveness over time, once you start using these things, you're going to use them because they work. And you will find that if you made a batch of stinging nettle in the spring, you may very well find that it works so well, depending on the volume that you're using, you might want to make it again before the spring's out. The other thing, as far as like a plant like stinging nettle, you may find that the stinging nettle fermented plant juice that you make in the spring is going to be different than the stinging nettle plant juice you make in the fall. Those of us that drink stinging nettle tea, for instance, and enjoy eating stinging nettle, that spring stinging nettle is entirely different than the stinging nettle with the seeds on it. In fact, they have entirely different characteristics. When you start talking about herbalists about the difference of these plants, you can realize that there's different constituents and different uses in them. Efficacy. Again, in my book, I talk about using a refractometer to measure the efficacy. You can actually measure the change in sugar content of plants as you apply the foliar sprays to them. You can go and measure it. And that's all defined, and you can figure out how to do it. But I think that watching insects turn away from a plant after you foliar spray it, that's pretty convincing as well. So yes, I think I covered at least a good portion of those questions.
Yeah, that's great. Marty.
Yeah, thank you. And Nigel, thank you so much for this download. I mean, I genuinely, just hearing you speak, and I also heard you on the podcast with Jason a few weeks ago. It really caught my ear and my mind as something that is rather revolutionary. And as an advocate for agroecological practices, organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, in Massachusetts, I want to be able to like promote this methodology. And I'm curious, like where the movement is at in adopting these practices. Who are the thought leaders like yourself who are developing these practices, and for the skeptic, which I'm gonna play the skeptic here. Like what body of evidence is there to point to, for real world application, for trials of using these amendments versus your standard commercial products versus your synthetic products, that kind of work. Has Rodale done anything on this? Is there any peer-reviewed research? Is there any just anything beyond? I mean, I appreciate the anecdotal evidence and like the ability to see the direct. I want to. You got me inspired. I want to be doing this. I want to see how it's working in my garden, but I'm not going to be able to give a tour of my garden and convince regulators that they should be supporting these practices, for instance. So I'm just curious where things are at in demonstrating the efficacy of these methodologies.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Marty, and thank you for asking that question. Well, I'm going to cite the body of evidence that got me on this path. There are many people in the world and many cultures in the world that have been growing really high quality food on the same soil for thousands of years. None of them go to the store and buy chemicals. How do they do it? Look at the earth in our country and the degradation of our soils and our inability to grow high quality food using these methods. I think therein lies the best evidence that could be possibly put forward. Okay, I know, I want science, yeah. Okay, I get that. I don't know people who are doing this. There are very, very few people. Most of them are indigenous cultures that still practice and garden the way they did for hundreds of thousands of years. And so we are the change. It's you, Marty. It's us. These are common sense ideas. They make sense. They've worked for millennia.
So just to be clear, though, we don't have like trials to point to in any sort of controlled setting to demonstrate these preps.
Well, when we say we, if you're talking about me, I have done this in my backyard, but it's like you said yourself, you want to come look at my garden and hang out, right? The bottom
I
line.
do.
Thank you. The bottom line here is that it's grassroots that works. It's people that make things work. When people try these ideas and show themselves that it works, and they show them and they convince themselves that they're not polluting the environment, that they're not supporting the oil industry, that they're not supporting all these things, and they can grow high quality food just like people have for forever, then they're going to start doing it. And I'm not sure what else to suggest other than there are many people around that have great ideas that aren't the standard agricultural model. John Kempf is one of my mentors in this regard. And it's John that really started me down this path 10, 15 years ago, right? Now, John and I can talk about these same ideas and understand them. Many people can talk about these same ideas and understand them and recognize them. Now, how many people are going to go and ferment stinging nettle and put them on their garden? That might be a different conversation. But think about it. When I want to grow high quality tomatoes, think about what is the quintessential amendment for a tomato, all right? Well, guess what? It's a tomato itself. That tomato plant put forth all of its energy into making that tomato. And when I ferment that tomato and make a fermented plant juice of tomato, I have captured the essence, the proportions, the minerals, the chemicals, the elements of what a tomato wants. And when I feed that to my tomato the following year as a foliar spray, how could I not be giving it exactly what it needs? So this is why the analysis of these amendments is so important to me. And this is why this database of documenting what's actually in these things is so important to me. When you do an analysis of a compost tea, for instance, what's really in it? When you do an analysis of a fermented plant juice, what's really in it? And so the science, it begins to be recognized to know that that fermented plant juice of stinging nettle has all the elements that plants need in proportions that plants can use.
That's great. Marty, I'm going to move on here because we have 3 more minutes. I want to get one more question in before I share a couple things to wrap up. Someone just wants to clarify the IMO for and what that is or where to find it.
So IMO again, just to be clear, my book is a recipe book. It's all just recipes. It's how to make all these things that we're talking about. And I originally wrote it just as a recipe book. And then I recognized that, well, this stuff is a little bit far out for many people. I need to write the context for using it as well. So that's what's there. So this is one of the few books that I know of where you can actually find these recipes. There's a Korean natural farming book that started me off on this, agricultural methods or agricultural farming, written by Chow Young Sang, which was a fascinating book, fantastic book. It's a little bit hard to read, but that's what got me going. And then there's another book by Jadam that's a very good book that talks about some recipes as well. I found that inspiring, and that really led me down the path of using leaf mold biology. Brian O'Hara has a book that is very useful in this regard for a small farmer or a mid-sized farmer, no-till agricultural cultural. Would you grab Brian's book? Yeah. And I'll get the name of that book as well. I'm sorry, Brian, I forgot. I can't remember the name offhand. Anyway, so those are a few books. And of course, anything that John comes up with is going to give you some insight into these things as well. But as far as actual recipes and actually following recipes, I recommend the Korean Natural Farming, the Jadam book, Brian's book, No-Till Intensive Vegetable Culture, and this one's not bad either.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much. And if you look throughout the chat, you'll see that we've pasted all sorts of links. So definitely go back through Nigel's YouTube channel and his website, and obviously his book. Thank you so much, Nigel. Really, really fascinating. Just a couple of announcements before we wrap up. We have a survey that Jesse will post in the chat for us. We'd really appreciate your feedback. We can make this conference better year by year for everybody by filling out the survey. Again, we have our vendor marketplace, lots of great things at discounted rates or just for your browsing, shopping needs, as well as the auction. I think someone had answer, or excuse me, asked this question. Attendance at the NOFA Summer Conference can fulfill 4 continuing education hours for AOLCPs. There's more info on this in the conference booklet. I think it's on page 21, so you can go there and check that out. And then we have tons of workshops coming up. This is really only, I guess you could say day 2, but it's like day 1.5 of all of our things that we have to offer. So there might be, I don't know if I can confirm this, but there is the option to subscribe to a text message platform. You can opt in to getting the details. And obviously we have our program book link. So thank you again, Nigel, so much. This is a pleasure. I'm going to hang out for, however long people may need me. And this workshop is recorded, so you'll be able to access it again later.
Thank you, Nancy, for inviting.
Thank you.
Thank you